I still remember the day my son-in-law, Mark, stood in the middle of my living room, pointing at me like I was some useless old man. The house he was yelling in was the same house I had bought with 30 years of sweat, overtime, and quiet sacrifices. The same house where his wife, my daughter Emily, took her first steps. The same house where I buried my face in my hands the day my own wife passed away. Mark knew this. He knew every detail. But that morning, he shoved a crumpled paper in front of me and said, in that sharp voice he always used when he wanted to sound in charge, "David, either you start paying rent, or you get out. I'm done carrying dead weight." I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't even look surprised. I simply smiled. Not because I was happy, no. But because after 62 years on this earth, I had learned something most people never do. A quiet man is not a weak man. A patient man is not a powerless man. And an old man is not a man who has run out of moves. Mark thought he owned the house. He thought because he handled a few things around here and paid the utility bills, he suddenly held all the cards. But the truth was simple. He didn't know whose name was written on the deed. He didn't know what patience could do. He didn't know how close he was to learning a lesson he would never forget. So I just nodded at him and said, "All right, Mark. If that's how you feel." He smirked, thinking he'd won something. He had no idea that in a few weeks, everything he believed he controlled would fall quietly out of his hands. Because sometimes the softest revenge is not loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just the sound of a pen signing a paper, while the person who wronged you never sees it coming. Let me take you a little back, so you understand how all this began. I'm David, a retired maintenance supervisor. Nothing fancy, just a man who spent his life fixing things that were broken. Machines. Pipes. Doors that didn't close right. Circuits that sparked too much. Funny thing is, I never thought I'd have to fix my own daughter's marriage. Emily married Mark 7 years ago. Back then, he was charming. A young real estate agent with a confident smile and big dreams. The kind of guy who talks fast, shakes hands firmly, and says all the things a father wants to hear when giving his daughter away. I welcomed him like a son. I gave him advice whenever he asked. I even let them move into my house when they were struggling with their first mortgage. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. Just a few months, Mark said. Until we get back on our feet. And at first, I didn't mind. The house felt less empty after my wife, Linda, passed. Hearing footsteps in the hallways again, it softened the silence. But slowly things changed. Little comments. Little complaints. Little hints that Mark felt he was doing me a favor by living here. He'd tell Emily things like, "Your dad needs to learn to keep up with the times. I don't know how long I can babysit this place." Or the one that always hurt the most. "He should be grateful we're staying here." Emily tried to defend me at first. But she had a gentle heart, too gentle for Mark's sharp edges. Whenever she spoke up, he'd twist her words or guilt-trip her until she quieted down. I didn't want to cause trouble in their marriage, so I stayed silent. I cooked for them. I kept the house running. I stayed out of their way. I even handed Mark small amounts of money when he complained about bills. But the more I gave, the more he took. And the more he took, the more he felt entitled. One thing about people like Mark, they confuse kindness for weakness. They mistake silence for surrender. They think generosity is something they deserve, not something they're fortunate to receive. And then came the day everything cracked wide open. It was a Sunday morning. Emily was at work. Mark stormed into the kitchen, holding the monthly expenses. "David," he said, "I'm not doing this anymore. I cover everything while you sit here retired and comfortable. From now on, you pay rent or you move out." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who thought he was standing on solid ground, without realizing he was standing on my ground. So I said nothing. Just that small, quiet smile, the smile that always made Mark uneasy. I stood, poured myself a cup of coffee, and walked away. I think that was the moment he truly convinced himself he had one. But he didn't know what I had been planning for months. He didn't know that the house he was threatening to kick me out of was already in the process of being evaluated by a buyer. And he didn't know that the man he thought of as dead weight was preparing a revenge so calm, so silent, that when it finally hit him, he would have no one to blame but himself. Mark grew bolder with each passing day. It's strange how a man who contributes so little can act like he owns the world. It's even stranger how he convinced himself that I needed him, when in reality, he depended on me far more than he ever realized.
But ego blinds people.
And Mark's ego was larger than any room he walked into. A week after his little outburst, he came into the living room wearing that smug grin he wore whenever he felt superior. "David," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "I've been thinking. If you want to stay here, we need to set up a proper agreement."
I looked up from the newspaper.
"What kind of agreement?"
I asked. "A lease," he replied.
"It's only fair. You're living in our home, using our resources." I talked to Emily. She agrees it's time for structure.
I almost laughed. But I didn't.
Instead, I folded the paper neatly and placed it on the table. "What did Emily say exactly?" I asked quietly.
Mark shrugged.
"She said we need stability. She's tired of feeling like we're carrying everything." That hurt, not because she said it, but because I knew she didn't. Emily was many things, but ungrateful wasn't one of them. Those weren't her words. They were his voice coming out of her mouth.
I nodded slow. "All right.
If that's what you both think." He smiled, thinking he'd cornered me.
"Good.
I'll draft something tonight. You can sign tomorrow." I gave him a calm look. "Mark," I said, "do you ever wonder why I don't argue with you?"
He blinked, caught off guard.
"What are you talking about?"
"Nothing," I replied.
"Just thinking out loud." And then I stood up and walked away. Because arguing with a man like him is like trying to teach a mirror new reflections. He only sees what he wants to see.
A shift in the air.
By midweek, Mark behaved like an impatient landlord waiting for rent money. He knocked on my door at night. He reminded me about the agreement. He left printed papers on the kitchen counter with highlighted parts, amounts he wanted me to pay, chores he expected me to handle, rules he wanted in the house.
Rules. In my own home.
He didn't know the house was already in escrow. The buyer, a quiet middle-aged woman named Helen, was prepared to finalize everything within 3 weeks.
She loved the house. Loved the old wooden beams. Loved the garden.
She wanted a peaceful place to retire. I knew she'd take care of it. But before signing, she needed one last thing. The house had to be empty. Mark didn't know that either. So, while he printed rent agreements and strutted around like he controlled everything, I spent my days organizing documents, contacting movers, and preparing for the final step. Silently.
Calmly.
Without a single hint. Meanwhile, the tension in the house grew thicker.
Mark kept pushing.
Emily grew quieter. And I kept smiling inside, not because I enjoyed what was coming, but because a storm only hurts the ones who ignore the warning signs. Mark had been ignoring signs for months. One evening, the three of us sat at the dinner table. Emily had cooked pasta, simple, soft, comforting. But the atmosphere was far from warm. Mark cleared his throat dramatically. "So, David," he said, sliding a paper across the table. "Here's the final lease agreement.
It's pretty straightforward."
I didn't touch it. He tapped the page. "Aren't you going to read it?" "I don't need to," I said. "And why is that?" Emily looked at me with worried eyes. Not because she agreed with him, but because she feared confrontation. I gave her a gentle smile, then looked at Mark. "Because I won't be living here much longer." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "Finally," he said under his breath. Emily's face fell. "Dad, what do you mean?" "I mean," I said calmly, "I've made other plans." Mark smirked like he'd won something monumental.
Good. That's for the best, he said.
We can finally breathe around here. Emily shot him a sharp look, but he didn't notice.
Great, he continued.
So when are you moving out?
In about 3 weeks, I answered. Perfect, he said.
We'll start fixing things the way we want. Maybe knock down that old garden shed. Turn your room into an office. Mark, I said softly, my moving out isn't the part you should be thinking about.
He frowned.
What's that supposed to mean?
I didn't answer.
Because some lessons are better learned slowly. His true colors finally show. Over the next few days, Mark's arrogance bloomed into full color. He bragged to his friends over the phone. Yeah, I finally told the old man to move out.
Took long enough.
He talked to Emily like they were finally freeing the house. He spoke loudly about renovations.
New floors. Maybe a new deck. His vision.
Every time he walked past me, he looked like a man who'd conquered a kingdom. But the truth was, he was celebrating in a house that wasn't going to be his much longer. I stayed quiet because silence sharpens justice like nothing else. And the more he boasted, the more satisfying the coming moment became. The night before the sale papers were finalized, Mark confronted me again. He walked into the living room wearing that same smirk. So David, he asked, you got a new place yet?
Yes. Good.
Make sure you're out quick.
I don't want delays.
We have plans for this house.
I nodded. You do.
You sound nervous, he teased.
No, I said. Just thoughtful.
About what? About how life has a way of teaching people the lessons they avoid.
He laughed.
I'll miss your cryptic old man lines. Then he walked away, humming. He didn't know he was humming his own downfall. The next morning, the truth would meet him like a quiet hammer.
Not loud.
Not angry.
Just final.
Because revenge doesn't need noise. Sometimes it's a single sentence that ends everything a person thought they controlled. The morning of the closing day started like any other. I woke up early, brewed my usual cup of black coffee, and sat by the kitchen window watching the quiet street outside. The trees swayed lightly.
A couple walked a dog.
A delivery truck moved slowly down the block. It looked like an ordinary morning, but inside me, there was a stillness, a calm certainty that only comes when a long patient plan finally reaches its last page. At 9:15 a.m., there was a knock on the front door.
3 soft taps. I didn't move.
I just sipped my coffee. A moment later, Mark rushed down the stairs. I'll get it, he said loud enough for the whole house to hear, like he was announcing his authority to walls that didn't care. He opened the door. And then everything began. A stranger at the door. Good morning, a warm voice said. I'm Helen. Her tone was polite, steady, pleasant. The voice of a woman who didn't rush for anyone. Mark blinked. Yes? Can I help you? Helen gave a friendly smile. I'm here for the walkthrough. The what? Mark asked, confused. Helen lifted her clipboard gently. The walkthrough. Before the closing. Mark stared at her like she'd spoken a different language. Then he looked over his shoulder at me. He was expecting help. Explanation. Something. I simply lifted my coffee cup in a quiet greeting. Helen stepped inside and continued, I'll just take a look around before we finalize the sale. Shouldn't take long. Mark stepped back. The sale of what? The house, Helen said kindly, as though she assumed he already knew. Mark froze. His face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I watched calmly. Like a man watching rainfall after predicting the storm. His panic begins. Mark finally managed to speak. There must be some mistake, he said, almost whispering. This house isn't for sale. Helen glanced at me. I nodded gently, giving her permission to answer honestly. Oh, the sale's been in process for weeks, she said. I've been working with David directly. Mark snapped his head toward me.
David, he barked.
What is she talking about? I took another slow sip of coffee. Exactly what she said. You can't sell our house.
Mark screamed.
I placed the cup down carefully, wiped a speck of coffee from the rim, and answered in a soft, almost fatherly voice. Son, this was never your house.
His breathing quickened. What do you mean? I live here. Emily lives here. This is our home.
You lived here, I corrected calmly. As my guests.
You said we could stay, he snapped.
And you showed me what staying meant to you, I replied. Your words made your feelings very clear. You didn't see this as my home anymore. You saw it as something you controlled. Mark's voice cracked with panic. David, you can't do this. I looked him in the eye. I already did. Helen continues the walkthrough. Helen, professional as ever, carried on with her inspection.
She didn't judge him. She didn't comment.
She simply did her job while Mark's world slowly collapsed room by room. Every step she took reminded him of a reality he couldn't escape. Every door she opened took a piece of imagined power away from him. He followed her like a desperate shadow.
This is insane, he muttered.
There has to be a mistake. We never agreed to this. What about our plans? This can't be happening. But it was happening. And it was happening quietly, exactly the way I wanted. When Helen finished her evaluation, she returned to the living room where I sat. Everything looks good, David, she said gently. We're ready for the closing. You can hand over the keys at the office this afternoon. Thank you, I said. Helen left with a warm smile.
The door closed.
Silence settled. A thick, heavy silence. One that carried truth, justice, and reality all at once. Mark finally spoke, his voice shaking. You sold the house without telling us. You threatened to evict me, I said. You told me to pay rent in my own home. You made rules in a place you had no claim to. You acted like the owner.
So you kicked us out, he shouted.
I shook my head slowly.
No, Mark. I didn't kick you out.
I made a decision for myself. You insisted I move out, remember? He swallowed hard, realizing what was coming. And now, I continued calmly, the new owner wants the house empty by next week. That includes me and you.
His jaw dropped.
This is revenge, he whispered.
It's not revenge, I said.
It's responsibility. You made it clear you didn't want me here. So I found a place where I'm wanted.
And what about us? He demanded. You're adults, I replied.
You'll figure it out.
Emily walks in.
Just then, Emily arrived home early from work. She saw Mark's pale face, my calm posture, and instantly sensed the weight in the air. What's going on? She asked gently.
Mark rushed to her.
Your father sold the house behind our backs. Emily looked at me. Dad, is that true?
I nodded softly. Yes, sweetheart. I did.
Why?
She whispered.
Because your husband told me to pay rent or get out, I said simply. So I'm getting out. Emily stared at Mark. You said what? Mark stammered. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I said, still calm. He wanted to feel in charge. Now he'll get the freedom he craved so much. Emily closed her eyes. And when she opened them, they were filled with disappointment, not at me, but at her husband. Mark, she said quietly, what did you expect? Mark had no answer. He never had a real answer, only arrogance masquerading as authority. Emily turned back to me. Dad, are you okay?
Yes, I said.
I'm more than okay. I'm moving somewhere peaceful.
And us? She asked softly.
You're welcome to come with me, I said. But I won't force you. Mark looked at her, panicking. Emily, you can't be serious.
She didn't respond.
Instead, she whispered, I need time. Mark's face tightened with fear. Not fear of losing a house. Fear of losing the one person he couldn't manipulate anymore. And that was the moment he finally understood. Quiet revenge doesn't ruin a life.
It reveals one.
The next few days moved slowly, like a quiet snowfall covering everything in its soft, cold honesty. Mark tiptoed around the house, speaking less and worrying more. He was no longer the man who barked orders or printed rent agreements. He wasn't the self-appointed landlord anymore. He was just a man desperately trying to understand the ground disappearing beneath his feet. Emily carried a sadness in her eyes, but there was clarity too. She understood now, understood everything I had been too gentle to say out loud. She spent most of her time with me, asking questions, listening, apologizing in her own quiet way. Mark, on the other hand, kept pacing the living room, checking his phone, muttering about options, though we both knew he had very few. Life has a way of humbling a man when he least expects it. And Mark had never expected anything. The closing day. One afternoon, I left for the real estate office to sign the final documents. I didn't ask Mark or Emily to come. This wasn't their responsibility. Helen was already there, waiting with her soft smile.
Everything ready? She asked. Yes, I replied. We signed. Stamped. Finalized.
When she handed me the check, I felt a strange mixture of relief and closure.
Not happiness. Not triumph.
Just a quiet ending to a long chapter. You're doing the right thing, Helen said gently. I can tell you're a thoughtful man.
I simply nodded.
Life teaches us to be. She squeezed my hand kindly.
You deserve peace.
And for the first time in a long while,
I felt it.
When I returned to the house, Mark was sitting on the couch staring at nothing. Emily stood by the window, arms folded, her mind far away. I closed the door softly.
It's done, I said.
Mark's head jerked up.
You sold it?
You really sold it?
Yes.
What about us? He asked, almost breathless.
You have 1 week, I said.
That's the agreement. He shook his head in disbelief.
This is insane.
We have nowhere to go. I sat down across from him, calm as a still lake. Mark, I said, this is the same situation you tried to put me in. The difference is, I made sure you had time.
He looked away.
It's not fair, he whispered.
It is, I said.
Fairness isn't always gentle. Emily stepped toward me. Dad, do you really want to move out?
I need peace, I said. You know that. And us? She asked.
You're free to choose your path, I said. Not bound to mine. And certainly not bound to his pride.
Mark swallowed hard. For the first time, he looked small.
Mark's struggles begin. The next days were a lesson he couldn't escape. He started calling apartments. Most were too expensive. The cheaper ones were too far from the city.
Credit checks troubled him.
Security deposits worried him. Everything that had been invisible suddenly became real. He wasn't ready for reality. Emily watched him crumble, and with each passing day, her patience thinned. One evening she approached me while I was packing a box. Dad, she said softly, I want to move with you.
I paused.
And Mark?
I asked.
He needs to learn on his own, she whispered. I can't keep rescuing him.
There was strength in her voice.
A quiet strength she had inherited from me, even if she didn't realize it. I won't stop you, I said. She hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't need to apologize, I said. Life teaches us all differently. On the morning we were supposed to leave, Mark was frantically stuffing clothes into bags. Emily and I loaded our boxes into a moving van.
The sunlight was soft. The air calm.
Mark ran out of the house.
Emily, he called. You're leaving? With him.
Emily turned to him, tired but steady. I'm leaving for myself, Mark.
You pushed too far. So that's it, he pleaded.
You're just going?
David gave us a home, she said.
You turned it into a battlefield.
Mark's face crumpled. You can come too, she added.
But you'd have to leave your pride behind. And I don't know if you're ready.
He didn't answer. He couldn't.
Some men lose everything before they learn anything. And some never learn at all. Before I stepped into the van, I took one last look at the house. Not with sadness. Not with regret. Just gratitude. This home had seen my joys, my failures, my daughter's childhood, and the quiet revenge that restored my dignity. Mark approached me slowly. He looked far younger without his arrogance, like a lost boy instead of a grown man. David, he said softly, I'm sorry.
His voice trembled. I met his eyes.
I hope you learned something from this, I said.
Not about me. About yourself.
He nodded, swallowing hard. His apology wasn't enough to undo his actions. But it was the first honest thing he'd said in months. Take care of Emily, he whispered. That was always my intention, I replied. Driving toward peace. Emily climbed into the van. I got into the passenger seat. As we drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it finally disappeared. Emily exhaled deeply. I feel like I can breathe again, she said.
Good, I replied.
That means you're leaving the past in the right place.
She looked over at me.
Dad, was this revenge? I smiled gently.
No, I said.
It was a boundary.
She nodded.
I think I understand. The road stretched in front of us, long, open, peaceful. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Freedom. Not from the house.
But from the weight of someone else's disrespect. A few days later, Emily received a message from Mark. He'd found a small apartment across town. Not the one he dreamed of. Not the one he imagined he deserved. But one he could afford. He was working extra hours. Learning humility the hard way. It wasn't my job to fix him. Life had taken over that role. Quietly. Patiently. As it always does. I won't lie to you. Walking back to my cabin that day, after speaking to the CEO, my heart was beating like a drum inside a quiet room. Not because I was afraid, but because sometimes silence before a storm feels louder than the storm itself. But I kept my face calm. Calmness has always been my sharpest weapon. Noise exposes you. Stillness protects you. When I reached my cabin, I saw a sight I had expected long ago. Arsalan standing there, hands on his hips, his face red, and two of his closest followers, behind him like shadows without brains. He spoke before I even got close. Did you go to the CEO? What did you tell him? His voice carried that mix of anger and fear. The kind of fear people have when they suddenly realize their castle might be built on sand. I didn't answer immediately. When someone wants an angry reaction from you, silence destroys them faster than words. So I walked past him, placed my files on the table, and then looked at him. What I had to, I replied softly. That single sentence made him snap. He came closer, pointing a finger near my face. You think you can go above me and get away with it? You think you can act smart? I looked at his finger. Then at his face. And said, Arsalan, when someone is drowning, even a straw looks like a lifeline. You should be careful what you grab onto. His face twisted. He didn't understand the meaning. People like him rarely do. But the men behind him did. Their eyes widened slightly, because they understood the hidden message. Your time is ending. He walked away cursing, banging the glass door so hard it shook. I just smiled. My revenge wasn't loud. It was slow, steady, and beautifully quiet, like water carving its way through rock, reshaping everything without ever raising its voice. The shift begins. The first real shift came when the CEO sent an email, not just to me, not just to Arsalan, but to the entire department.
He wrote,
"From now on, all client strategies, forecasts, and reports will go through a WISE before approval. He will have equal decision rights as the team lead."
I didn't expect applause. I didn't get any.
The office suddenly became a silent jungle. Everyone was watching. Everyone was recalculating their loyalties. Everyone was studying my every move.
And Arsalan.
He looked like a man who had just discovered a crack running through the foundation of the empire he built on arrogance. That week, he tried everything. He tried to sabotage my reports. He tried to turn colleagues against me. He tried to prove that I was too slow, too inexperienced, too bookish. But what he didn't understand was simple. When you are honest and consistent, you don't need to fight for respect. Your work fights for you. Each time he attempted something against me, it quietly fell apart. Because truth doesn't need noise. But lies. Lies collapse with the slightest push. And soon, people started noticing the difference. When the team started shifting. Colleagues who never spoke to me started approaching me privately. "A WISE, your report was really good." "A WISE, can you guide me on this client?" "A WISE, you're very calm, how do you stay that way?" They weren't praising me. They were migrating. Moving from a sinking ship to a stable one. People feel it when a leader is about to fall. Employees have instincts sharper than any animal in the wild. And slowly, silently, my presence became stronger. While Arsalan's presence became uncomfortable. He would walk into the office and conversations would pause. People would exchange looks. Some would suddenly remember something urgent and walk away. The man who once controlled the room no longer controlled the atmosphere.
And he knew it.
The meeting that changed everything. A major client was unhappy. A very big one. Their account was handled personally by Arsalan. The CEO called for a meeting with the whole upper team. When the client joined the call, angry and disappointed, Arsalan tried to defend himself with loud explanations and excuses. But each time he spoke, the client became more irritated. Then the CEO finally said, "A WISE, what do you think?" The moment he said that, the room changed. Like a sudden drop in temperature. Everyone looked at me.
I didn't speak fast. I didn't attack him. And I didn't try to prove myself.
I simply opened the client's performance charts, calmly explained everything that had gone wrong, and then offered a clear plan to fix it. By the time I finished speaking, the client relaxed.
They said, "Yes.
This is exactly what we want." Arsalan's face turned pale. Because in that moment, he finally understood something tragic. Respect cannot be taken. Authority cannot be forced. Leadership cannot be faked. He had the title. But I had the competence. And competence always wins in silence.
The fall of Arsalan.
After the call, the CEO asked the entire team to stay back. He looked directly at Arsalan and said, "This isn't the first time we're having issues with your leadership management. I've received complaints from clients and employees." A long silence followed. Then the CEO turned his chair slightly toward me and said, "A WISE, from today, you will supervise all major accounts. Arsalan will shift to internal tasks until further notice." That room heard the quietest kind of revenge. The one that doesn't scream.
Doesn't insult. Doesn't hit back.
Just a soft, gentle correction of balance. Arsalan didn't look at me. His eyes stayed glued to the table. Because losing power in front of the same people you once intimidated
is the purest form of defeat.